Good morning. It is 11:15 a.m. on Sunday, December 11th, 2016. I'm Christiana Ellis and I just got up. This is 5 more minutes. So, yesterday's D&D session playing Death House went really well, and we do have a video of it, and so that's on the channel if you want to watch that. We only got about maybe a little bit more than half through the overall thing, and we might do a session 2 at some point, but it's still pretty good. I had a lot of fun. But today is Sunday, and that means time to continue our rewatch of Avatar: The Last Airbender. This time it is for season 1. Keep blanking on the episode numbers. I should pull this stuff up when I'm talking about it. I think it's 16. The Deserter is the name of the episode. And, okay, see, now I have to look it up. So the name of the episode is The Deserter, and let's see. And I was right. It's number 16. It was originally aired on October 21st, 2005. More than 10 years ago. So this episode was another good one. It follows up a little bit on the earlier episode, Jet, where we had kind of an explicit acknowledgement that, not everyone in the Fire Nation is evil, right? Like, some of them are just civilians, and as we discover, some of them are like conscientious objectors. Like, they're not necessarily in support, but those people almost really have to go into hiding because there's just so much propaganda everywhere. So they want to go to the festival because Aang is pretty convinced that even though it's risky going into this firebending festival because they might be spotted, he needs to start seeing some advanced firebending techniques up close. He's going to have to learn firebending at some point. It's interesting to note too that at the same time that they find the wanted poster for Aang, there's another wanted poster on the same board that shows the blue spirit mask that Zuko wore when he broke Aang out of Zhao's fortress. So the blue spirit, is still, they're not done looking for whoever that is, which is a nice touch. Also, it's just a little grace note acknowledging Zuko, given that he doesn't appear in this episode. Now, this is all, Zhao is primary antagonist this time around. And so what we have here is this time, we have the kids going into town, this firebending town, to see this festival. And so it's convenient because their disguises are so poor. We have, Katara and Sokka with their cool black cloaks and, roguish demeanor, mysterious stranger, and then Aang just pulling up his back of his shirt over his head. But thankfully, it turns out masks at the festival is already a thing, so that simplifies it quite a bit. And there's just some funniness with which masks they choose, and Katara deciding that they should have different ones, and then of course we get a little bit of levity with a stall selling hot fire flakes by them, and Sokka buys them, and they're really spicy. And Katara's just like, what exactly did you expect from hot fire flakes? And then so we see a little propaganda puppet show where the kids are encouraged to cheer at a little puppet version of the Fire Lord defeating the Earthbender who tries to take him out with a cowardly sneak attack. That's pretty standard stuff. Hey, Luna, shut down. Shh. And so then there's a display of some advanced firebending, and it's really pretty clever stuff. It's clearly an example of firebending used for something not specifically combat related. The idea of shaping the fire into specific shapes like dragons, and the idea that you've got the dragon on a line and moving it around is pretty cool. Um, and but the idea that we haven't, so Luna, stop. We've definitely seen so far that the other elements like air, earth, water have a great deal of utility involved with bending them. Um, you can use it for all sorts of things beyond combat. Fire is a little trickier. I mean, certainly we haven't had any firebending protagonists so far, unless we count the episodes that just focus on Zuko. Um, but it seems like it's primarily useful for combat, which kind of ties in with some of the stuff later. So they watch, and Katara ends up brought on stage as kind of like volunteer to be protected from the fire dragon, and whole thing about like, oh no, I'm losing control, oh no, and Aang doesn't, he's too wrapped up in his own feelings for Katara to realize, even though Sokka does, that this is just a show. She's not really in danger. Aang's a little too naive in that sense. So he intervenes to save Katara, who was not really in danger, as this fire dragon explodes into a bunch of confetti and glitter. That, oh no, he has now just revealed himself on stage at this festival in Fire Nation town. And so that's not great. He tries to dance to impress everybody, but nah, not working. So they run away. They're trying to escape. There's a return of Aang's little whistle, his flying bison whistle. And it was kind of funny to have an acknowledgement from Sokka that are we really 100% sure that actually works, or was it just a coincidence before? But in the meantime, the mysterious figure we've seen kind of following them from the forest catches up with them and guides them to help them escape. And it turns out it is, not the deserter of the title, but certainly a deserter, someone who lives in this region, but not amongst the rest because he doesn't support the Fire Lord. Instead, he follows this exiled master firebender. And, everyone says he's crazy, but he's not crazy. And, Katara and Sokka don't necessarily find that encouraging, but Aang is pretty convinced to say, listen, I'm going to need to learn firebending, and it's going to be hard to do that if all the firebenders hate me. So if we have a firebending master here who already is not on the side of the Fire Lord, how can we pass that up? And it's a valid point. It seems perhaps a risk worth taking. And so they do make their way, and at first this guy won't see them, and he's mad, and the guy who brought them there is in trouble. And but Aang is just kind of like, it's interesting because his naivete, obviously, it gets him in trouble sometimes, as we saw, with the show. But there's also sometimes where he's witnessing all of these layers of etiquette and posturing and that sort of thing. And he just kind of sees that, like, oh, but he's just in that little tent over there. I could just walk over there and go in. So why don't I? But sure enough, it's a little more complicated than that. This guy is not just selfish about refusing to see him. He seems to really know what he's talking about. For example, he already knows what point Aang is in his training. Knows you've not yet mastered water or earth, so you're not ready for fire, and then makes a pretty solid case that, like, fire is different amongst the elements in a way, because of kind of what I was talking about earlier, is that in a lot of ways it's harder to use it for things other than combat. Now, we could certainly imagine things like that we use fire for in the real world, cooking. Um, you know, uh, I'm not. I'm just struggling with simple one-word things like you could fire a clay pot. That we use fire. Fire is useful. But what he talks about is that like when you use earthbending to move a boulder, the boulder's not gonna move by itself. It'll stay where you put it, assuming you're not on putting it on a slope or something. But the problem is that fire almost acts like it's alive. It can kind of grow and spread all by itself. So you could firebend just a little bit of fire in a place, but it won't just stay there. It'll either disappear entirely if you don't put it somewhere it can grow, or if you put it somewhere where it can grow, it now can grow completely outside of your control. And it requires mental discipline that Aang doesn't have yet. And I think that as we watch that scene, we're meant to feel conflicted because on the one hand, we are with Aang. We know he's right, that he does need to learn firebending. But on the other hand, when this guy is trying to explain why Aang isn't ready, like, his objections ring pretty true. And so it's an interesting idea that sort of puts it all in a interesting context. The show explores this a little bit in both this and in Legend of Korra, the idea of like what order you learn the elements in. And I don't know that fire would always be last. For example, Avatar Roku, Aang's predecessor, was from the Fire Nation and therefore probably learned firebending first. But it comes down to personality because, of course, I mean, this is looking way ahead, but in Legend of Korra, Air is the one that she has trouble with. In any case, Aang. So he is pretty insistent, despite Jen, the firebending master's objections, until Jen receives a vision of Avatar Roku, basically saying, as the Avatar, I've done it thousands of times, and I will continue to do it. Don't be so quick to refuse. And so then he agrees to teach Aang, but we definitely see in Aang still the lack of self-control, the impatience that is exactly what Jen warned about. And so when Aang is getting bored and frustrated with the slow pace of his learning, he at one point decides to play around in, like, when he makes fire for the first time, he's playing around with it and he starts trying to do, instead of being pleased with his small advancement and taking it easy, he starts trying to do the advanced techniques that he saw in the town. And because he is not able to control it, Katara's burned. And it could have even been worse, but we can see that it's clearly very painful. Her hands are burned. And she runs away terrified and in pain, and Aang is just suddenly learns the lesson in almost the hardest way he could, that like he hurts the person he cares about the most because of exactly what the master warned him about. And that's hard, right? And we definitely we hear too about this idea that part of the reason that this firebending master is in exile like this, that he is the deserter as the episode calls him, is the fact that his last master his last student was very powerful but had no self-control. And even before it's explicitly revealed, we're led to understand that in fact was Admiral Zhao. And so for Zhao to be following the reports of the Avatar being sighted at the festival, is following up the river. But we have now Aang with the opportunity to recognize the rightness of his the master's words. But so I'm kind of doing things out of order. But so Aang, in his own sort of through point, we will circle back to talk about Katara. Um, he, you know, Katara was scared and in pain and hurt, and Sokka was furious, and the master, was right, and Aang concludes and swears never to use firebending again. And even Katara kind of points out, like, well, you're gonna have to, right? And he's like, no, never again. And we can understand that it's. I think we instinctively are kind of with Katara in that moment of he's perhaps learning the lesson in not quite the right way. Like, he's recognized his own lack of control with regard to firebending, but he has not recognized within himself his own capacity to grow and gain that control. And so he determines that the only solution to prevent himself from losing control again is to just never do it again. And in some ways, that seems impractical, but he's pretty determined. In the meantime, we do have Katara discovering through her burned hands and trying to soothe them in the water, kind of inadvertently discovering that she is able to use her waterbending to heal her hands. And the master tells her that this is something that some of waterbending masters, some of them, are able to do, and she must have that ability as well. And so that's an exciting discovery for her, a new ability, and it's being able to heal. So, like, not only is she healed, but now she's discovered this new facet of herself. And despite her pain and fear from Aang's fire, she's still, this isn't like when Aang hid the map from her. She, I think, is immediately more forgiving of Aang than he is of himself. So when the Zhao shows up and the master is determined to, try to hold them off as much as possible, but saying, no, you need to flee now. So Katara and Sokka are prepared to just fly away, but Aang, hearing that the master is holding Zhao off, decides to go confront Zhao anyway. Master escapes in a way that is not entirely clear what has become of him, but we're not see him killed. He disappears into a fireball, so he got away apparently. But Aang now is able to use what he learned about self-control and to recognize it in Zhao and use it to basically trick Zhao into burning his own boats. Luna! No! Luna, come! And so that's an exciting lesson to take, and it's good for Aang. It is a step forward, even if he has... He learned half of a lesson about self-control, and so he seems to have now bricked off the possibility of learning the other half rather than completing the thought. But there's no time for them to really reflect on that too much, because now they still need to head up to the North Pole. That's where they're heading to learn waterbending, and so we'll be back with. Next week, when the saga continues, it'll be episode 17, the Northern Air Temple. I suppose as they're passing through, you check all of them, I guess, right? Anyway, so I will talk to you guys tomorrow for 5 more minutes.